Good morning. This is the Successful Funding Show. My name is Carl Dakin. I'm the capital coach. I provide services to small businesses and communities on raising funding. And in this show, we talk about all different types of issues regarding funding, how to get it, where to get it from, who cares, all the important issues. And today with me on the show is Stephen Schaff, I'm teaming with on a project called RCI Community Funds. And we're going to talk about working with, through, and in collaboration with communities as a way of benefiting, getting anything done in a community as a sole entrepreneur, as a small business, a community project, or something else. But before we get into that, I'd like to remind everyone who may be listening in at this time that this is a live stream show. You who are watching this live in the audience have an opportunity to comment, ask questions, or just say howdy, that you're in the neighborhood while you're passing through. So, welcome you to do that, and we'll go from there. So to set the table, Steve and I met earlier this year, and we and some other people kind of realized that we all had kind of a common interest in supporting communities that are designated as underserved or economically distressed. And we started looking at the prospect of developing a special funding vehicle that is not an SPV as it's defined, but our own definition of a special funding vehicle, an SFV, I guess we'll call it. And our purpose was to try to figure out how to direct money into a community in a way that would cause enough economic traction that the community can begin rebuilding, can catch up with everybody else who's been moving forward, and in this way address a whole raft of different problems, from poverty to equality to social governance, and achieving what Andre Miller defined as true democracy, a word that is not limited to elections and politicians, but to the way we go about living our lives, where everybody has a chance to be who they are, what they want to be, and nobody feels like they've been left behind. So, Steve has done extensive work through his career in building communities, organizing communities, getting communities in gear, in motion, and moving forward. And so, Steve is going to share with us some of these stories and examples and advice as we dive into the whole subject of how do you get a community on board? How do you get them to be an ally? How do you get them to be a resource for you when you're trying to go forward? So, with that, Steve, welcome to the program this morning. I appreciate your coming on as a last minute guest to substitute for a friend of mine who I'll have to speak ill of later at another time. And we'll get into this. But yeah, Steve, provide a little bit of a background on yourself and how you came to be one of the most notable people that I'm aware of who has done so much extensive work in getting communities organized.
Mhm. Well, Carl, I appreciate you picking me out to help with this, and I will never turn down any opportunity to talk about the work that we need to do in the community, and the you know really purposeful kind of work, but also the specialty that's really needed to really do it well. So, just to give you and the audience a little bit of a background, I started out in the late '80s in real estate development. Had never imagined in my life that I'd be going into business. Moved to DC to work on my PhD. And long story short, I accidentally got into a real estate deal when I was living in, shall we say, a disinvested community, which frankly is the types of communities I've lived in and worked in most of my life. So I got into a real estate deal where I learned you could actually buy real estate without a job and money. So that worked. And then after I got into my first successful deal, I realized, rebuilding underserved communities is really a moral imperative, of course, but it's also a financial opportunity. So I took a leave of absence from school, thinking I'd go back after about a year to do a little bit of real estate investment for my own personal security, because I wanted to do work in social justice and activism, of which economic equality is a big part of that. And then I realized, you know what? I would love to have a PhD, but at the end of the day, starting my own real estate business was one way to raise the capital to do things that I thought were needed to change communities. So I dived in knee deep and found out very quickly that the mechanics of doing this in underserved communities is a little bit different. But I was pretty successful in my first year, and I decided, okay, let me just stay here. And school was great. I love grad school. You can never stop learning. But the idea was then to literally start working in the communities and recognize that rebuilding communities is really a multi-billion-dollar opportunity, let alone a moral imperative, and also a common good effort where everyone wins when distressed communities can be healthier. So all that to say is, over the years, shall we say, my naivete starting off became very, let's just say I became educated about the process. And that is, if you're going to work in any community, obviously, you really need to understand the community you're working with. So what I found, some of the lessons I found was, I would introduce myself to the nonprofits who I wanted to work with as a for-profit developer with a nonprofit agenda. Now, this is the late 80s. The language wasn't there. Socially responsible businesses were like, okay. But the semantics weren't there. You have to explain that you can do business actually for good. So long story short is, what I recognized was nonprofits did not embrace me with open arms. The investors I worked with just thought I was pretty naive, but I've always come up with really good opportunities because I was literally in the community. So that was the beginning of my understanding that community investment really requires the cooperation of the community. So as investors, and the audience here, of course, are investors, the first thing you want to know is, how safe is my investment? Can I mitigate risk? And obviously, I want to get as much return as possible. So those are key things you always have to look at, no matter how socially, what your social objectives are. So one of the
Steve,
things I found is, go ahead.
let's take that apart a little bit, because
Sure.
you identified two or three key concepts that I'd like to go deeper on here in today's show. And I'm going to start with the concept of profits versus nonprofits. A lot of people, divide these two groups as though they're night and day, black and white, that they're totally different. And as the guest on the community revitalization show a couple of weeks ago pointed out, that the only difference between a for-profit and a nonprofit entity is its tax status. And so they both need to operate where they have money to do what they're there to do, to perform their mission. The difference is that a for-profit entity gets to share its profits with its owners. A nonprofit is intended to put that profit back into motion to go forward. But both of them have one key thing in common, which is economic sustainability, which is, if you don't bring in more money than you spend, you will not be here tomorrow to spend any more money. And this is where I think a lot of people get confused in trying to do good and create impact, is they get confused with charitable purpose to the extent that they're trying to do good, but they forget about the economics of the situation. And so as we're talking about working in communities and helping communities, everything we're doing starts with the assumption that we need to make enough money from what we're doing that we can do more and we can be here tomorrow to do more.
Exactly. And you're absolutely right. Nonprofits, when I was starting out, and I think to a great degree today, never saw themselves as really serving a commercial purpose. So you're a community development corporation, and your role is to try to improve your communities. Well, guess what? You're in real estate, you're in organizing, you're in information, you're in marketing because your lists are very important to outside players that you're going to try to attract to improve your community. So for years, I ran into what I call the hippy dippy mentality, which is nonprofits. You spend half your time trying to get capital, which means you can't really do your mission well. You can't attract the best people because they never know if they're going to get paid this month or next month. So it's a really dysfunctional process, even though the function of a community development corporation, for example, is really to do economic development. That unfortunately they would cede over all the great information, the data, and the community relationships to outside forces that would come in, make a nice little donation, maybe. And when I say little, usually very little, and then basically take that information and use their economic ability to then redevelop or improve communities based on their profit motive, which does not always conform with what the community really needs.
Yeah, so that brings up another important commonality, and that is, as you point out, that a charitable organization quite often spends half of their time raising the funding that they need to go out and do their charitable mission. And when they start raising money, that is a completely different skill set, knowledge base, everything from whatever their mission happens to be. If they're growing food, if they're helping build houses, if they're doing all those kinds of things, that is one body of information, one background, one experience. But when they go to raise money, then they have to have somebody on the team who knows how to raise money, where the money's at, why somebody would give up that money. And this distinction is also true for small businesses, where if you talk to a small business, they may know how to make a widget, they may know how to retail it perfectly, but when it goes to raising capital, which is what I'm all about all the time, it's like sometimes just stepping into another dimension or a different world where they're like, wow, I don't understand how any of this works. They abandoned the general principles of marketing and communications and so forth because they don't understand it. And so you have a high failure rate. So you end up spending more time raising funding trying in order to get back to your primary objective, which is whatever your business happens to be or whatever your charity happens to be.
Mhm.
So one of the things that RCI Community Funds is looking to do is trying to help fill some of the gap on the funding by creating a community investment fund. And this is an injection, like a vaccination, into a community in the sense that we recognize that these communities are not experts on raising money. This is not their skill set, not their background or experience. And oh, by the way, they are challenged because they are a distressed community. There's a variety of reasons why the world seems to be passing them by. And it's going to need some outside experience and some outside money if we're going to get this whole thing turned around. And so it's important to talk about this distinction between doing what's good and raising the funding to support and pay for doing what's good within a sustainable model so we have enough money left over that we can keep doing good.
Exactly. So capital, of course, is the obvious ingredient needed for any kind of development and, of course, investment. But also information, obviously, is really important. And when it comes to communities, where you're going to invest in communities that probably some investors have never, they, ever were in, how do you know what's really going on in that community? And this is, again, where a lot of community nonprofits know their community very well. They know which opportunities are out there. They know which leaders are out there, even though they may not be the most obvious shining examples in the community. That if you don't work with them, then you're already, jeopardizing your project, because communities are tight. People resist processes. If you need zoning or other things and the community is against you, then guess what? You're going to have a more expensive process if you can get your project off the ground. So who in the community that you really need to plug into and authentically create the relationships and partnerships is incredibly important. And that's one thing investors, I think, really miss. They come into the community with the mental attitude of, we're here to help you people. Now, I remember I was in a meeting with a community group that I had assembled on behalf of an investor who had a lot of money. He's very impressed with my mission. I introduced him to this roundtable, and he said, I'm so excited to be here. I'm here to help you people. Meeting was over. Now, the group was polite and this and that and the other. And afterwards, after the meeting, I said, he said to me, that was a great meeting. I said, no, you missed absolutely everything. You killed that meeting when you said some things, and he had no idea. My point here is the tone of that meeting went from, all right, this guy who is comfortable with our neighborhood because he is in our neighborhood, is bringing in this other source of capital, and he said the wrong thing. When you say we're here to help you people, that's a big sign. No, you're not.
It's the wrong thing. So I'd like to recognize Don Cohen, who's joined us in the audience this morning. Don is an advisor mentor to me in doing this LinkedIn live show and in using LinkedIn to help me build my community and build my brand, and which has helped me establish the Community Revitalization Show with Steve and the other members of the RCI Community Funds team on Thursdays. So if you'd like to tune in 2 days and really dive in deep beyond what we're talking about this morning to how to rebuild communities, you're all invited. You can go to my LinkedIn profile and find events, and you will see a show that we'll be setting up right after this show for 2 days, where Karen Pollock will be our guest for the show. And I'll learn more about what the show is about as soon as I talk to Steve when we get off this show. But Don has been helpful to many small businesses, organizations, and so forth. And looking forward to engaging Don as we work with a community to help it build its identity, to unify its operations, to help itself. We're looking to set up a LinkedIn live show for each of the communities we work with so that there is a common hub of communication, because one of the problems of being passed by is that too often the community is sitting in an island of no information or no common communication platform. And so it can't say, look at us, because nobody can see them, because there's no communication channel, and it's difficult for people to express themselves and share information. But so Steve, it's interesting that you explain how there's people in the community that you're not seeking their permission, you're there to support them. So in some sense, they are in charge and you're asking permission to come into the group instead of the other way around. And we've seen people come into a community, like you say, and go, we're here to help you. And basically that's interpreted, my experience has been, we're here to make profit off of your backs without your participation. And if you would please get out of the way, we'll do whatever we want to do, and maybe it'll help you. We think it will, but if it doesn't, that's okay. I mean, Bill Houston, as a member of our group, has coined a phrase called stakeholders to stockholders. And the point that he makes with that is that too often these community improvement projects do not enable or provide for anybody in the community truly to profit or share in the wealth building that can happen in these communities.
Hmm.
And this typically results in gentrification, a pricing out of the people who live in the community while somebody else makes a profit.
Yeah, I think again, one of the things I learned is when outside forces with capital, which means usually they're never in these communities, they were making these mistakes. Like I said, well, you never say we're here to help you people. That's And the reason why that's really important is one, when you set that tone, you're missing two things. One, you're already setting up the attitude that you really don't know this community, and the community is going to be defensive because usually when people with money or people who look like us come into the community, it's usually a bad sign. You're either going to buy something on that corner because of the illegal supermarket or something, or you're undercover, or you're going to start the process of gentrification. So you come in these communities and you don't recognize that if you don't show respect and authentic willingness to collaborate, then you're going to have resistance. So that project you may find that maybe needs a zoning variance, that neighborhood was going to fight you, and that's going to cost you a lot of money, which of course impacts your return. If you go in with the attitude of, hey, what would you like in this community to see happen? Here's where we're coming from. How can we come together and really create this partnership? That's where I learned very quickly that that's how you find the deals. That's how you build your portfolio, and that's how actually the rest of the community then starts doing things that supports your own investment, like get involved with bringing businesses in because you're showing them how and where the capital is to bring in small business that would support the residents of your housing development, let's say.
Yeah, it's been my experience that I'm never going to enter into a community unless I'm invited. And so if I see a community that needs help, I need to find one of the local leaders. I need to gain their trust. I need to build a relationship with them. And then if I'm entering into the community, I'm doing it by invitation of somebody who is viewed and respected as a leader in that community. When I ask them, the people in the community, to do something, I'm not doing the asking. It's there's somebody that's one of theirs, one of the people who live there who are going to benefit or not from whatever is being proposed. And that way it's not me trying to cram down a design or a plan or a project on somebody. We're doing it as you described it, where you say, here's what we think might be of help, but it's the community leader who's actually putting it on the table, and you're in a support role from day one, trying to help the community leader do something that they have not been able to do so far on their own. And at the same time, you're trying to meet the needs of the community as they state them, not assume or again cram down something that may not be anything they care about.
Yeah, your typical investor is pretty savvy. They're usually comes from a business perspective or background, or the families have been business. They just don't think in terms of what would open up the best kind of opportunities for me in the community that I want to be involved with, not necessarily to exploit, but I want to max my returns and minimize. And they just don't understand this approach. Same with big corporations that understand that your little community that's now taking that little one-story building and then converting it into a multi-unit apartment and center and so on, et cetera. If I'm a utility company, I'm gonna make a lot of money with you expanding that. Therefore, in the very beginning, we shouldn't give you a little chump change contributions. We should understand we want to invest in you because we're going to sell more electricity to you when you build all this out. And that's a foreign concept with corporations. They just don't understand that. If you approach them and say, hey, this is a group that has some savvy, some real potential, and we're bringing people together, and we can make you more money. How about you become more of a collaborator or partner versus a donor that gets your name up on the next year's gala or whatever the case may be. But really be an investor because you'll get tremendous returns.
Yeah, so another concept that we're working with that again is critical, we think, to successfully rebuilding communities is the concept of community capital. And this is the collective wealth of all the residents who already live in the community. And one of the problems with a lot of projects that are proposed is somebody comes in from outside, it's their money, they're the investor, and they take all the profits with them out of the project. And technically, it didn't help the community. It may have actually hurt the community because they're exporting wealth from the community to someone who lives outside. And the people who are there to begin with go, yeah, that didn't do me any good. I didn't get a chance to participate. I'm not wealthier tomorrow than I was yesterday. And so there's every reason for them to go, this isn't helping me. Why should I get behind this? Why should I support this? And I think that any project that is proposed to a community has to get on the table early and often, that this is intended to help build wealth in the community, to have the community capital grow in size. And it's got to explain that, and it's got to create opportunities for everyone to participate as much as possible. Otherwise, this is somebody else's project. It's from outside the community. There's really no reason to help make profits for somebody else and leave everybody in the same situation they started in.
Exactly. The other big issue I always found was the capital stacks that are typical in the community are just always were, and I think still are, pretty dysfunctional. Now, fortunately, through efforts and priorities that our initiative is taking, is it's becoming a little more common to kind of work with aggregating sources of capital. So, community development investment funds, DCIFs, DAFs, foundations, and others that want to, or private investors that are okay with very patient returns, are now beginning to talk to each other a little bit more, or through the efforts of us on the ground. Part of what RCI Community Capital is looking to do is really help aggregate all this, because at the end of the day, the projects we want to invest in, underserved communities, almost always go up, because we're not just going to go in and invest in the one-off and then leave. Our approach is really the whole community fabric. How can we do this in a way that creates steady growth, that doesn't destroy the community, but from a marketing perspective and in returns perspective makes sense? So the question is there capital that will defer their returns for 5 or 10 years so that the project will make sense during the first 5 years, knowing that in 5 or 10 years, the market and the community and the underpinnings will guarantee you'll get a good return? That's something that's been out there for, I think, decades, but finally, I think before the pandemic, it really started happening, is these sources began to get a little more willing to do this. We're not quite there yet. Efforts like ours, where we are tapping in and building bridges amongst this and matching it with real, authentic, viable projects on the ground, is really a change that I think has happened in the last 5, 6, 7 years. That's truly fundamental, a little slow to come. But the question is, can we, with our efforts with RCI community funds, for example, can we help facilitate that? Can we show that you can invest here, but if you don't need that money for another 5 or 10 years, then great. Then this is how these deals can work. And that takes some finesse too. And most community-based organizations have no idea how to put that together. So part of our priority is help educate and bring them, frankly, for self-serving purposes. We want to work closely and mitigate our risk, but authentically create communities that we're all proud of. And the community that was originally that was disinvested doesn't get blown out and destroyed.
Yeah, so and I agree with you. I think that we're going to be talking about a variety of new types of investment models, different things that actually may follow the progression from start to finish, or a series of different types of investments that occur throughout the development cycle. So we may be taking one group of investors, replacing them with a follow-on group of investors, because as you do a real estate project, as an example, you have pre-development money, development money, construction money, and operating money. And these are all different flavors of capital that have different types of risk, and therefore they appeal to different groups. And in doing that, one of the things we've recognized is we want to have the residents be as big of a stockholder in this projects or whatever we're happening to doing. But we also recognize that we have to get external money in the door in order to have enough money to get stuff done. So it becomes a bit of a compromise, a bit of a offset where we want to build the wealth in the community, but we need outside money to build the wealth. So in designing the funding for this, we kind of want to bring in the outside money just to the amount needed, and then as quickly as possible pay them off so they can go back and invest in another community, and then have enough money profit generated from the activities of the fund to roll over to continuing growing investments within the community. But at that point in time, it's owned by the community. So we're doing a little bit of shifting ownership, knowing at the outset we've got to have that outside money to some degree. And then over time, we'd like for this to be all the money in the community that continues to build and regenerate. So we're going to talk about a lot of different funding models that'll probably be a little bit new, a little bit different, or a slightly different twist on them in order to do this. And again, this is outside the scope of not only the charities and foundations and so forth, but it's generally outside the scope of most economic development offices and groups that are working in this direction, because they have a tendency to look at a single project and focus all the energy around that project, and do not take into consideration the synergy, the complementary benefits that occur from collaboration. And this is another key thing that's being built into the community fund model by RCI, is it isn't a standalone, single, isolated investment. It'll be a group of investments that each element is designed to energize and help the other elements, so that you're getting a higher energy impact, and the true term synergy actually happens instead of being a buzzword we throw around all the time.
Yeah. Now, another perspective of making sure you find the best kind of investments in the community, both again financial and social returns, which is a priority of ours, is to not just work with the community, but institutions that have grown to a size that can create scalable change. For example, the faith-based community is a tremendous opportunity to partner up with. Churches own a lot of land, particularly in communities that have deteriorated over the years, where their church flock has literally, escaped to the suburbs, whatever. The bottom line here is, again, at the very beginning of my career, I would see all these community churches that had very little attendance, had big parking lots or land around them in the middle of underserved communities. And I'm thinking, their church is falling down. How about I go and talk to the church people and see if we can kind of work together? And I did way back, and people would look at me like I had a third eye, which I can understand, because churches don't do stuff like that until after a couple decades roll by, and they realize, wait a minute, we need to survive. Our flocks are going away. So the community enterprise community partners is an outstanding national nonprofit, just outstanding. Is doing things on scale. Has been around for a while. About 15 years ago, they created the faith-based development initiative. So they understood what I found years ago. Of course, they knew this long before I came on the scene, obviously, that working and putting capital together to help churches develop their properties or joint venture with mission nonprofits or developers is a growing way to really help revive communities, support the churches who used to be an incredible anchor in our communities back in the other earlier generations. So the knowing and being aware of an enterprise community foundation effort is also important. So when I'm in the community and I'm looking at these churches and I approach them with possibilities, let's say. And then I say, let's talk to people who've really got this down and refer them. Then that becomes a stronger basis for a relationship, on top of the fact that the Enterprise Community Partners, which is a fantastic, huge national nonprofit, they created their own sources of funding and all that sort of thing. Uh, that's when you have a coalition that's coming together, and more interest, emphasis, and access to capital to do it right. So that's also important. So working with the local community development corporations, of course, is important. Our own expertise without victimizing the community is very important. And also knowing these national initiatives out there like LISC and other foundations or nonprofits, it's really important to have those kind of relationships that you can add to the mix in terms of effective revitalization.
Yeah, so one of the things I see commonly with small businesses is they have this sense of do it myself, do it all by myself. The term DIY is kind of taken to the extreme, to the point where I can talk to a small business and I'll ask them, I said, who are you working with in your community? And I typically get a blank stare. I mean, virtually, no response. I said, well, have you talked to the Economic Development Office? No. Have you talked to your local church or any of the churches? Have you talked to the civic organizations, whether it's the Rotary, the Elks, or any of these groups who are already in place? Have you talked with the community foundation? And I go through this entire list of people who would work with a business to help them be successful. And this business not only has not talked to them, it's not even aware they exist. So this is kind of one of my common challenges is trying to wake up, make these small businesses aware that one, it's silly to the point of being stupid to try to do everything by yourself. Unless your ego is mandating that you can only do this by yourself because you don't want anybody else to take credit for what you're trying to accomplish, then you should automatically reach out to all these community organizations and you should figure out how you are a part, or as I wrote in an article last week, a cog. You're a cog in the machine. In this case, the community. You're there and you benefit the community, and you should work with the community both to help the community, but also to help yourself. I mean, it's a symbiotic relationship where both people benefit, but that can't happen unless you're engaging with and interacting with your community. So, Steve, I know that you stepped into a lot of communities where you knew no one, and then suddenly you knew everyone. So, what's the magic or trick to getting that kind of collaboration in order?
Well, of course, over time, I began to really, all my work was in Washington, D.C., which is a wonderful city, but we've had our troubles. We were the murder capital of the world during the crack wars in the communities I was living in. By the way, white people never get messed with. The penalties are much higher. Anyway, so for me, it was literally physically being there. So walking through alleys that I've never seen before, detecting and reading the alleys by certain odors that could give you indication of what's going on in that alley, all these things. And frankly, I think part of my success was I'd show up in these communities and I'd come back and the people on the corner, were like, again, this is not good because he's probably undercover or something. But then finally, I would start talking to people, and they would kind of get a sense of why I'm there, and I'd ask questions that no one asks about, and then again, I just then would show up and start, bringing everyone together. So I guess the whole idea here is you need to know what you're doing. You need to be authentic. You really need to know what to look out for and who to look out for. Who are the real leaders? Who are the obstructionists? Who are the ones you really need to bring in close? And then you have to back it up. So who are all the community leaders, like church deacons and others that I was connected with, or nonprofits, or even better yet, you convey that you are part of the community, because I would literally say I live and work in these communities. So I would remember having many conversations where I'd ask, where do you live? And they're like, well, you don't know where I live. I'll tell you the street, but and I said, yeah, you remember, I remember on Ames Street. Yeah. Do you remember in this, and then, and they'd be like, so that the authenticity was, okay, this guy's been around. But then again, you have to show that you're there not to, again, exploit and take advantage. How can we both work together? Because their knowledge of the area and their connections and who I really should be plugging in, so I'm not wasting my time, was incredibly important. And that's something you can't teach. I think it's something you really have to convey, because people can really, the bullshit factor is just so easy. Like the guy who came in and said, "We're here to help you people." He thought he was saying the most benevolent thing, and I could just hear the groans from all of us, and our eyes roll. You can't have that attitude. So again, it was a matter of practice or authenticity, or the fact that as a teenager, I worked in my uncle's ice cream store in Philadelphia as a kid, which was turned into a ghetto in 4 years because the first black family moved in. So I'm not sure. And I was in the Army when I started out as a kid, which is basically 50% minorities at the time. So there's a certain natural comfort in the area that let people hear me a little bit and gave me that little extra edge to talk what I wanted to talk about. Then years later, I would say, do you remember how the 700 block of Brandywine Street used to be? Bombed out, drug infested, drug controlled, crime ridden block, full of drug slumlords. We went in there, we organized, we got rid of all that, we rebuilt a couple hundred, converted a couple hundred slumlord apartments into home ownership condominiums. Oh, you did that? I said, not only did I do that, but did that with a whole network of people. Where's the next community? It could be yours. And go take a look at what we did there. And you'll see that through this effort, this is how we did it. Now, I had tremendous patience because, again, I came with a social justice perspective, which turned into be a real asset to find deals and to get into opportunities that your typical investor couldn't do. Otherwise, you just come in these communities with all the money and pay cash, blow everyone out, and do your own thing. And that's how you destroy communities and don't really create benefit for all.
I think that if a business wants to be successful, they've got to get beyond the all about me, look at me, I'm me. That's all they talk about. And I've worked with businesses to kind of do a mapping, as I call it, who are all the organizations in a community. You've got the government agencies and programs, you've got the churches and religious organizations, you have economic development groups, you have all kinds of different specialty purpose groups, civic organizations, and they all need help. They all have a mission. And the success of a business by itself contributes to that mission and to a large degree because, again, as we're planning investments into a community, we're recognizing that businesses that are locally situated there are the key because that's the beginning of building wealth in the community. They create jobs. The jobs allow people to buy the housing that they're living in. And you create all these mechanisms for independent individual wealth that are all working with everything else. But this is never going to be workable unless we can work with that community down the street. We support those things that help the community. We become a member of a chamber or a professional organization or a civic group. We work with people in the community to campaign for representation that is bringing resources into the community, supporting the community, and not being beholden to some other group somewhere else outside of the community. We could go through a long list of this, but it really means that the business is engaged. It is part of the solution. And by teaming with the community is there to support the business. They'll get more referrals, they'll get more customers, they'll all these things that help the business succeed. And then you start getting this reverb, this amplifier effect that can happen. And it's just frustrating to me when I see a business that's disconnected from the community in which they're working, they're living, and you're like, why are you doing it that way? And it's basically like raising funding. They don't know better.
Well, that's very important. Is there's so many components that go into healthy businesses that support healthy communities, that support healthy real estate investments. It is so interconnected that we can't miss any of these links. So, for example, if we're going to go in and rebuild, create housing, and there's nothing around it, that is not a good investment. If we can create housing and create and support small businesses that can serve the community, that can create jobs and help start building the fabric, that's even better. The problem, though, is that young entrepreneur, that guy who's got all, or woman who's got all the energy, that wants to set up that small business that will do well. Well, in their upbringing, no one in their entire family for generations ever did business. So the idea of what a GAD is or accounting for all that is oblivious to them. All they know is they could make the best fish fry sandwich that even white people will come and stand in line in, right? The problem then is, all right, so you get them up in business and they're out in a year or two because they just don't know how to run a business, not because they're not capable, because there's never been that history in their families to educate. So to me, technical assistance, here you go, free money for 2 months worth of assistance in how you could run your books. That is not a failure. So I think that the real benefits of and priorities of RCI community funds is we're there to invest in the real estate. We're also there to invest in the community. And by that is, if we're going to do housing in your community and we're going to create a commercial space for businesses, we want businesses that will be very successful. So part of our priority with the fund is to invest in businesses simultaneous that would be housed in our properties, simultaneous to our development. And with the hope that within 5 years, whatever, that they then get rid of us and they become a full-blown, effective business. That mentality was absolutely missing when I first started out. And I just thought, why isn't this happening? And we don't need to get into all that. But the bottom line here is, so if we're investing in a community, it's real estate, it's the businesses, and frankly, through crowdfunding, which our partner Bill Houston is an expert in, how can we help bring resources to you that we can help leverage so that we have a comprehensive community development? Then go to the church down the corner and say, man, you got that big parking lot, and let's create more housing or incubators or art centers. That's another very important part. Arts, I found, it was the glue to bring communities together, especially Black, white, all diversity comes to these communities. So how do we tie all that together? Well, that's our approach, is how do we bring this together? And more importantly, aside from the social impact, it mitigates risk and it protects our investments. It's tough to bring all these things together because the normal process is, we got money, we're looking for opportunity, we're going there, we're going to make our money, and then we're out of there and we're going to spend our money some other, or park it in another, some island somewhere. Localism is a thing that's with us and we need it, but it's tough to do. But it can scale, and that's kind of where we're at. We want to be the beginnings of that scalable opportunity, which we'll see in the coming decades. Rebuilding communities is very profitable with great social returns.
Yeah, it's one of the. I think it's a myth that simple is better. We always talk about keep it simple, stupid, and focus, and all these other things. But when we talk about launching a business, when we talk about rebuilding a community, actually complex is the only way that it's probably going to work. If you don't have everything integrated, if you don't think of everything as being part of a larger ecosystem,
Hmm.
where every single part has the ability to impact every other part, then you're missing the harmony, the vitality that can occur within a healthy community. And so part of it is we have to explain, educate. We have to put systems in place which may not exist. There's gaps everywhere in these communities where they may have somebody from the government that's come in and says, "Hey, we're going to put up 50 houses here," and you're like, "And where's the money coming from?" And after it's done, is that money going to leave the community after it's been brought in, which means we're actually bleeding the community of money over time? Who's going to live in these houses if there's no jobs here to, for people to afford? Or what's the most common thing, which kind of drives me crazy, is, oh, we're going to rent these to people and we're going to, take up a large percentage of their income with the rental payments. So they have no chance of building wealth, and they're not given an opportunity to own any of the real estate, which is going to appreciate over time. And so they're just cut out of the deal. And you're like, well, okay, so you come into my backyard, you're going to pull profits out of this project, you're going to put me in a position where I cannot build wealth, and then you tell me it's good for me. Let me think about this for a moment. Maybe I don't want to get behind that project.
Well, you just really encapsulate everything we were talking about in that statement here. Yeah, complex is something that for profits don't like to deal with. If we can go in there, just put cash down, buy up the properties, build the same stamped out crap without any regard what happens 10 or 20 years ago, or if it encourages other things. All we know is numbers work on renting this place. We're going to have a good property that we could sell at a profit, make money off development. That is the standard. So when you come with an idea that I've always been coming up with for years, where you bring these sectors together. Oh, let's do housing. Let's work and partner, invest in the businesses. Let's partner up with the community before they get ripped off by investors paying them too little for properties. And also let's include these other things like arts and other things that really bring people together. So why not then look at a community where we want to invest in housing, the businesses that we could bring in here, and all this other thing. And another component, which we really haven't talked about, which to me is incredibly important, but business people do not like to talk about the political or community engagement, and that is one of the components. And I'm probably more of an activist than a business person in terms of passion. If you don't get your community to start electing their own people, that is also a problem, because when you rely on politicians who get their money from outside sources, I guarantee you that politician, as friendly, as nice as they may be, are going to be more beholden to their financial minions. So a big part is we need to start electing people from our community. And believe me, in the underserved communities, where the leaders are. They may not look like politicians. So that, again, that's another part which I do keep separate from my business people, because same with my activist friends. They don't like talking business. They accept me. I'm an oxymoron. I'm a progressive business person. But again, to build these strong communities, I want a council person or a delegate or a state senator who will authentically back us up in what we're doing, versus someone will say, yeah, great, but they're getting these huge donations from opposing. So all these things you have to take together. And to your point, it's complex. Bringing these multi-sectors together is really tough to do. And again, with my very broad background in the community, I woke up one day after the housing market blew up, when someone said, you realize you've worked in all these sectors, both deep in the community and on a national basis. Put it all together and change the way community development is done. And it's like, great, now 10 years in the process, here we are, because it's still not conventional, although it's getting closer. But also tying all these things together and having a proof of concept is beginning to emerge. So that's why foundations, DAFs, and others begin to realize, we can invest in these communities and get an okay return, but we really need to know who in the community to partner up with. And again, that's I think one of the beauties of our mission and our approach.
One of the things you mentioned earlier is investment crowdfunding. And from the standpoint of rebuilding communities, this is one of the keys because instead of limiting investment to wealthy people who work through intermediaries who often don't care or they're charged by law with maximizing profits in those investments. So they'll never invest in this particular community, or if they invest in this community, it's mine and take it and run with it kind of a mindset. Where in investment crowdfunding, the laws were changed nationally all the way back in 2012 to allow everybody to invest. And it's now possible for a small business, a community project, to have people who make low incomes still be able to participate in this and build their own wealth by investing in themselves, in their communities, in their local businesses. And prior to this legislation passing, the game was rigged unintentionally. It says, oh yeah, we've got these low income housing tax credits, but they're all sold to big banks in New York. They're not letting the average person on the street do anything or the person in a distressed community do anything. So they were out of the game before the game started. So investment crowdfunding, as we intend to work with it, and as a number of groups across the United States are trying to make people more aware, this is going to be a critical tool for allowing people to invest in themselves, in their communities, in their local businesses, so that these communities can get on their feet again. And it's very important, and it is complex all by itself because raising a large volume of money from in small dollar amounts means you got to have a lot of people. So it gets complex just on that one element before we start talking about the engagement and the interactivity of the investments.
It's another tool where you could act locally, invest $100, a few, whatever, and that $100 is not just an investment, but if you're going to invest something, chances are you're going to frequent it, you're going to talk to your friends, and that's how again you build up local community strength based on the social fabric that you're helping build out there. So yeah, crowdfunding is great. We got a great expert in crowdfunding. It's still in its infancy. We need to reach out to a much larger audience, and we've got some strategies in order to reach out to that. But local investing is a key component that is relatively new and can be powerful if we could really start building out the scale.
Yeah, so that brings us up to the end of our hour today. Steve, thank you for being my guest on the Successful Funding Show. This show is typically held every Tuesday at this time, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. But next week, there'll be no show because I'm going to be on the road in a place where it's impossible for me to do an internet broadcast. So we're going to skip over next week. So for the viewers of this particular show, thank you for being here today, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. But if you thought that today's topic was of high interest to you because you are a business in a distressed community, because you are a community leader, an economic developer, you're someone who has property in a distressed economic community, come watch us in 2 days on the Community Revitalization Show, which is presented by RCI Community Funds. And we're going to dive into more topics about how we actually create this complex situation in the face of a little bit of pushback and adversity, gain the trust and the confidence of the community and help them start rebuilding. So I invite you to join us in 2 days. Look to an announcement on my profile that will be going up later this morning. And we'll talk more about it at that time. Also, I have my own newsletter that goes out every day. It will continue through next week, but we're going to be talking about sources of funding, going on a day-by-day basis of what is a source of funding, how does it match the needs of a particular business or community with that. And the RCI also puts out a weekly newsletter that comes out on Wednesdays that talks about different issues in community rebuilding, and also features a community that's either done it or in the process of rebuilding and how they go about doing it. So you can get some examples of things that you may want to apply to your community or ideas to take forward in rebuilding a community. So we invite you to subscribe to either the instant funding newsletter of mine or to the community revitalization newsletter of RCI Community Funds. With that, Steve, last comments, anything you'd like to say before we say goodbye?
Information is power, so check out these newsletters. And again, let's work together. There's some great opportunities, and look forward to a bright future rebuilding communities and generating returns.
Okay, take care, everyone. We'll see you later.